All right, welcome everyone. So welcome to ScotiaBank, taking market risks in the trading floor digital with Tableau. This is your last chance if you're not in the right session, basically. My name is Antoine Desoni-Favreau. I know this is a mouthful. Basically, it's just to give you a little bit of my background. I've been using Tableau for 5 years now. I started in a hedge fund managed account platform firm back in Montreal using Tableau. I did that for about 2.5 years, and then I moved to ScotiaBank in Toronto, where I've been working of putting together the infrastructure for the market risk and Tableau, basically, in the bank as well as the trading floor. So today, the agenda, we're going to cover a very quick introduction of ScotiaBank because you might not know this bank if you're not from Canada. We're also going to go, what was the goal of the Tableau integration in ScotiaBank? What did we try to achieve, basically, by going the Tableau way? What was the implementation, the how did we do it? We're going to focus mostly on the integration through Tableau Server because it's a very core aspect of our strategy. And we're also going to cover the training across the different teams and continent that we did, basically. We're going to talk very quickly about tabcmd because it's also a core aspect of our infrastructure. And then we're going to finish a little bit with what are we using Tableau for, show some examples right there. So maybe go into some PDF that we're generating or play a little bit with Tableau Desktop. So just to get an idea, how many of you are working in the financial service industry or in banks right now? OK, good. So I'm going to try to not have too much financial lingo, but I think there's a good chance that you guys are going to understand. How many of you are working in IT? OK, a few people. We're going to try to say nothing bad about IT too, so that's perfect. And everyone here using Tableau Desktop, or are there people that are not using Tableau Desktop? OK, and raise your hand if you're not using Tableau Desktop, basically. OK, great, perfect. OK, so ScotiaBank. ScotiaBank is one of the big 5 Canadian banks, basically. A little bit less than 100K employees, a lot of customers, as you can say, almost $1 billion in asset. The headquarters is in Toronto, Canada. But even if it's not the biggest Canadian bank, it's probably the most global one. It's across 5 different continents, as you can see on the map. It's a public company, of course. And we're going to focus mostly on one department, basically the department that I work with, which is called Trading Floor Risk Management. I'm going to refer to it to TFRM, just so it's a little bit faster. What this team takes care of is basically everything that is oversight and monitoring of the trading floor. So basically, trading floor is all the front office activity that the bank does, all the trading with the different counterparties that exist in the market. So we're talking about other banks, corporation, government, across all the different type of asset that exists in the financial market. So our role is to do proactive analysis and set up the market risk policy, basically set up how much risk the bank is willing to take, how much exposure the bank is willing to take, what is the risk appetite, and make sure that the framework in place can manage that properly. So basically, we're trying to make sure that 2008 doesn't happen again. It's a pretty big task. Obviously, we're interacting with regulator as well. So we're interacting with the Federal Reserve, with OSFI back in Canada. Everything that's related to Basel, Volcker, Dodd-Frank, and all of those keywords is something that we're working with quite a lot. The team itself is about 150 employees, and they're also situated across all region and all continent, even if the bulk of the people are in Toronto, basically. So every single industry and every single company is going to have different challenge when it comes to their data strategy, depending on what they are actually doing. So what is the challenge of financial market and of the trading floor? When one aspect to it is that a lot of the client flow comes, people are calling our traders and they want to go into a transaction within the next few minutes in a lot of cases. And if we're not able to answer their demand, there's a good chance that we're going to lose a client to another bank, basically. So we need to be able to answer question very, very quickly. We need to be able to quickly access complete and granular data and to do our analysis or investigation in a matter of minutes as well. Otherwise, we lose potential revenue. So that aspect is very, very important, and it's going to basically flow towards the rest of the presentation. So the role of TFRM with the front office, with the traders, basically, is we're the one point of contact. We're a little bit like the one-stop shop. We don't expect the traders to know 200 different departments and who to call for every single issue or every single question that they have. So they basically can contact us for almost anything, and we're expected to provide an answer, especially when it comes to data. So we need to be able to handle a lot of different type of data and basically be self-sufficient. And if it's really something that is not ours, be able to transfer the question to the right group. So So we are playing with a lot of data that we do not calculate or generate ourselves and that we do not have ownership of, but we need to understand it well enough to be able to provide insight of it, basically. So what's the goal of Tableau integration, basically? So you've probably seen this in the past, this kind of graph in the past where we're going towards a better future, basically. So in the past, we were using mostly like TFRM was mostly doing very standard reports. They had very simple warning or alerts when our risk exposure was becoming a little bit too large, so we can talk to front office, see how we can edge or cover our position. But we wanted to do a little bit more moving forward, and Tableau was a great tool for this. So can we do more querying, more drill down, really do the investigation, see where the risk is coming from, do some ad hoc reporting, and then eventually gets into the predictive portion, which is statistical analysis, forecasting, predictive modeling, of course, optimization, and eventually go towards prescriptive analysis too. So this is where we're starting to move towards basically implementing AI and ML within artificial intelligence and machine learning within our infrastructure, eventually get that data to feed into Tableau. So obviously, a big part of this is the automation process. We want to make sure that every time you're building something with Tableau, there's always going to be data that's going to feed it for the next couple of years. So whatever you do is going to be fully automated. And this will make us a lot more efficient, basically, which will allow us to do a lot more work and provide more value-added analysis. The aspect is remove end-user computing. I don't know if this is a problem in some of your firms, but in our case, the background of people working in market risk or in financial market usually are not people with extremely technical background. They're not developers, they're not software engineers. So they will know a few software. They will know, for example, how to play with VBA, do a couple macro, maybe R, MATLAB, but they will not be extremely good at it, and they will have basically different set of knowledge or skill. So the idea is we want to move away from all of these macros that people are doing in Excel, and when they leave the bank, there's a big key man risk because no one can take them over easily, and then whatever report or tool was developed, the second it bugs, well, basically we work a little bit in a bad situation where we might need to spend days to debug it or just get rid of it altogether. So by standardizing everything in Tableau, we don't run into that issue anymore. Also, a lot less data scrubbing. I'll cover this a little bit more, but that way, if we spend less time trying to fix data issues, we have more time for actual analysis. And a big point, too, was to get the full ownership of the analytical and the reporting infrastructure. In the past, maybe you've been working with other departments that have their own set of priorities. If we wanted to build a report that was using a technology that we were not owners of ourselves, it could take 2 months, 4 months, 6 months before we would get any progress to do any change. The idea was to move everything basically in-house, have the full ownership of that, and be able to do our own prioritization. So way more flexible and be able to have a way better turnaround, basically. And of course, the independence from the IT system promotion schedule. Basically, a lot of our systems are doing monthly promotion, for example. We want to be able to turn around dashboard, turn around analysis in a matter of minutes or hours. If we have to wait for the next month, that's not going to work out. So have an infrastructure that is not as dependent on the back-end promotion schedule, basically. So how do we do this? Basically, this was all done through multiple phases. The first aspect to it was proof of concept. We started about 2.5 years ago. It was a slow start, but we did a first proof of concept internally because it was important to sell this to higher management and that they would see that this was the actual solution. Because if they do believe in it, then everyone else eventually is going to believe in it, and we're going to have a lot more incentive moving forward. We also did this with a third-party consultant just to bring a little bit more credibility to the table as well. And then we started the actual onboarding of Tableau. Basically, we got a dev Tableau server, and we did some training by phase. So each different phase would have a different team or different set of team, and we would do team-based training to make sure that people could learn, and every single phase would have different objective and different deadline. Eventually, we moved to a prod server, a production server. We finished the onboarding of Tableau, and then we moved to doing a little bit less of just simple limits or very simple reports and start focusing more on analytics, dynamic tools, what Tableau is so good at, basically. And now in the future, we're going to move towards implementing AI and ML. So the two core aspects of this is our Tableau server. We're going to talk a little bit more about all the different aspects to it, and then the training through phases, as what I was mentioning. So first thing, what is so great about Tableau Server? Well, definitely the fact that you can track usage. So right now I'm just showing you a quick viz from a picture from a long time ago where we look at different users, how many views do they have, which reports, how many views each report has, when was the last time the colors, when was the last time it was accessed, and how many different people saw it, basically. But the idea there is that when we send PDF reports and emails all day long, we don't know who's actually opening it, and we don't know who's actually using it. So we don't know if it's really providing value. That might have been a legacy report from years ago that's not really that useful anymore. If we can do everything through Tableau dynamic reporting, basically on the server, then not only do we save space in our Outlook, but we also are able to track the actual usage. So this is really important that you're able to get access to the back end of Tableau Server to know who's using what, who's clicking where, how often do they do it, when do they do it, because then you can start building everything around this and add actual real value to your business partners. Okay. So core aspect of our infrastructure is definitely the server data source. We're using server data source across the board, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this to explain why. First, like every single data source, there's always two aspects to it. It's either a large extract, or you probably want to do live queries. We use a lot of extracts in our cases just because we usually have an enormous amount of data. We have multiple extracts that have more than 100 million rows. A lot of them have a large amount of column too. As you know, Tableau is columnar-based, so the more column you have, the slower the extract. So this is something we've been struggling with, which is give as much dimension as possible, so you get a lot more flexibility. You can do more analysis, but then you're losing the performance. So how do we find the middle ground there? That's not always an easy task. And then the approach to our extracts, obviously, is to do incremental daily refresh that we're going to do through tabcmd. So basically, every day we get the newest data overnight. So when people come in the morning, they're ready to do their analysis. And then we do full refresh on a weekly or monthly basis, because once the extract grows to 1 billion record, 1.5 billion record, the performance just dropped too much. And it's also becoming just way too large to store on Tableau Server. A core aspect to all of this is the materialization of calculations. So many people are using Tableau with live queries, or they're not materializing their calculation. They're like, Tableau is such a slow tool, which is not the case. Basically, we're materializing as much as possible directly on our server data source. So once again, you can materialize any calculation that is not using a LOD, an aggregation, a parameter, a formula that is dynamic, like today or now. So you can materialize a lot of stuff, and especially if you're using string calculation, this will be very, very useful to improve performance. So this is a core aspect. Make sure to materialize everything that we can for performance improvement. Obviously, we use live query too. We use Tableau join to basically, as much as possible, to leverage everything that Tableau 9.0 and forward has been implementing in terms of optimization of queries. But one very important aspect to this is that we want to always put data source filter to limit the query size that can happen. Basically, we don't want people doing live queries using our server data source and querying the old database and slowing it down. So we also basically want to implement a lot of custom SQL, stored procedure, because in there you can put parameters that are going to limit the amount of data that can actually be queried. So the idea is always limit the query to the bare minimum that is needed and make sure that this is in place for the users to do it without having too much problem. So reporting infrastructure. The idea behind this is we're going to have one data source and be able to build n amount of report. So we don't want to do extraction of data in the workbook just because we have hundreds and hundreds of workbooks, hundreds and hundreds of reports. If we have 600 extract running overnight that are all 100 million records, well, that's way too big to handle, obviously. So one data source that is flexible, that can allow you to build basically 25 reports on top of it, but that remains also performant. So that's very important. And it also limits the amount of queries in the backend. So we care about all you IT folks. And the aggregation is in Tableau when possible. So even if pre-aggregation is faster in some cases, you get more flexibility if you can choose the level of detail of aggregation directly into Tableau as well. And then the analysis, the idea, so going back to what we were mentioning, financial market, we need to be able to connect to data basically extremely fast. We need to be able to answer questions quickly. So the idea is we can connect to any source of data in 3 clicks. You just open Tableau, you go data, new data connection, Tableau Server, and then you have a list of, for example, 200 different data sources, some of them live, some of them extract. You click to them, and then instantly you have access to billions and billions of data, basically. And then eventually too, all of this, because everything is hosted on the server, there's a lot of query caching that happens on Tableau Server. If 2 people are using the same data set, doing similar queries, we're gonna get some performance optimization there. Oh, and one last aspect too, which is really interesting. Every time someone does some ad hoc analysis on any problem or any investigation that they're doing or any analysis that they're doing, they can just simply publish it to Tableau Server, leave it there, and then the next day, the next month, the next year, it's going to be filled with new data. So if they ever run into the same problematic, they do not have to do the analysis once again. All of it is already done. So you're saving so much time that way, and that analysis is also available for everyone, basically. Okay, so one aspect too that we wanted to go around is the amount, I don't know if this is the case in your firm, but the amount of corporate red tape that exists, and for a good reason, to get access to data. So basically, having individual people requesting access to backend to dozens of different systems is not only very hard and time-consuming, it's consuming to request it, but it's also time-consuming to get to learn the data, get to learn the different tables, learn which join you want to make if you want to, depending on what you want to do. And it's also very risky, because if you have thousands of people or hundreds of people querying a backend and they don't necessarily know what they're doing, well, there's a good chance that your database is going to go down eventually or slow down quite a lot. So the approach to this that we have for infrastructure is basically we host everything on the server. All the connections are hosted on the server. None of the individual users have access to it directly. We use generic accounts, so do not change account for all of our, do not change password account for all of our server data source. And everyone get access. So we can do all the permissioning of our backend system directly on Tableau Server as well for all of the people in our group. So because of that, there's once again query caching, there's limited database impact, and the idea is to have data for everyone. It's also great because someone who gets onboarded just join our team. Within a matter of days, they have access to the full area of data that we have in the bank. They don't need to go through months and months of learning or getting access to the different system. So very quick onboarding of new employees as well. So what about the training aspect? So the way we approach this basically is, as I was mentioning, team-by-team integration. So we did multiple sessions of training, as much as possible hands-on. You probably did a couple hands-on during this conference. You probably realized that you're learning a lot more that way than if you're just listening to someone talking in the front. And also put together a lot of documentation. So one thing in the past that we did, everyone that's going to the conference, we're grabbing as much documentation as possible, bringing it back home, sharing it with people, sometimes redoing some small presentation that happened, and basically putting together our own documentation that is more relevant to the financial market or to the risk management industry that we're in. Another aspect is Tableau support team. That is 24/5. We're not working on the weekend. Basically, the idea is like if you have an issue and you're in Singapore, you have an issue, or you're in London, whoever is supporting you, if he's in Toronto, well, he's not going to be able to help you until the next day or until he actually wakes up. So we want to make sure that everyone gets the support at all time, and that took a little while to actually put in place. Another great aspect, too, is so remember, we're not necessarily all technical users, and now we have to learn a brand new technology. Some people have been in the industry for 20 years. They really don't feel like learning something from the ground up and going away from what they've been doing successfully for so long. So how do we make sure they don't give up, basically? Well, a core aspect to this is the co-location support. And what I mean by that is if you have an issue and you're blocked using Tableau Desktop or Tableau Server, well, you don't have to call anyone. You don't have to send an email. You can literally just get up and go to the person that is supporting you that is 5 feet, 10 feet, or 15 feet away from you. So it makes it so much easier that the people supporting our own Tableau Doctor or Tableau Jedi are basically on the same floor, sitting in between the different members that are using Tableau for the actual support. Because even if you want to learn sometime, it's kind of hard to find a solution on the internet or on the Tableau forum. Other very important aspect of training, the incentive. How do you make sure that people get into it? Well, big thing was the management support. We needed to have the management buy-in. That's why we did a proof of concept and show the value added of it. And then this helps moving forward, because if management care, everyone else cares too, probably. Clear objective and deadline. So each phase and each different team would have clear objective at the beginning, at the midterm, at the end of the phase, basically, and clear deadlines as well. And the idea was to keep tension. We don't want people to be using Tableau a lot for 2 weeks, not use it for 4 months, forget everything, and then start over again. Want to make sure that there's a little bit of work that's being done along the way, basically. And also one cool thing is we would do like one very quick meeting every week, show the weekly tips and tricks. If we knew that a lot of people were working with CSVs, we're going to show them how to connect to CSVs, how to do very nice union, et cetera, et cetera. So different tips on each project that people are working on. Okay, tabcmd. So tab command. So this is very important for us because we're using a lot of extract. We want to make sure that the extract generation is not done on a scheduled basis, because you always get delays in your data. So if you're scheduling this for 4 a.m. and there's a delay, if you run it at 4 a.m., you're going to get incomplete or wrong data, which will force you to regenerate your extract, and then you don't get your data in time for when people get in. So we want to make sure that everything is not schedule-based, but it's trigger-based, and we're doing that with tabcmd. Basically, the second the data is loaded into any system, we get a trigger, and then tabcmd sends the command to Tableau to actually generate that extract. So that's very important. And even if you can do task prioritization with schedule-based schedule-based extract on Tableau Server, you can also do the same with tabcmd. So if your server cannot run more than 6 extracts in parallel, for example, and you got 10 that are triggered at the same time, you need to be able to tell them which one is the most important. PDF generation as well. So we're still using PDF. Unfortunately, it's really hard to change everyone's mindset. But some of the PDF that we have reports of like 50 pages, and you probably have that, or they're connecting to like 15 different sources of data, or you have dashboards that are definitely not following the best white paper and the best tips and tricks, because they have 25, 40 sheets on one dashboard, so that takes a long time to load. So you don't necessarily want people to just go every morning and spend 30 minutes generating PDF on Tableau Server. So we are automatically generating them and then dumping them or sending them by email to each of the different members, and then archiving them as well for audit purposes. And then one other aspect with the PDF generation of tabcmd, since we're tracking the usage, we basically know who's going to see what, at what time, and when is the heavy traffic. So what we can do is we can generate the PDF, a dummy PDF just before that happens, and basically cache what is on the server. So we're changing it so we enable viz and query caching on our server. We generate the PDF, and then that information cached. So even if we have a dashboard that is usually slow, takes a minute to load, it's cached, it's going to load in 2 seconds. So we can bypass some performance issue that way. And then what we can do on top of it, if this is a dashboard that is dynamic, where you're changing filters, you're changing parameters all the time, well, that obviously is not cache. But what we can do is we can do pass parameters in URL, and then also generate PDF of like a second drill down or a different parameter selection of that dashboard as well. Okay, so there's an example there. I'm not going to go over it. Okay, so let's go into some of the use case that we have here and what are we using it for. So there's obviously, we have a lot of systems that don't have any data quality logic directly in the backend. So we're using Tableau directly to do data quality. I think that's the biggest deal when you're doing analysis for an hour on something and then realize you have wrong data. Kind of ruins your day. So we're doing this where we're going to be checking every day, basically through Tableau. Has it been loaded properly? Has it been loaded in the first case? Does it need to be looked again by a human to double check that the value makes sense, because our script is not sure or not if this is the right data? So basically, just give you an indication. People can just go in the morning very quickly, look at their dashboard, and they're going to know, oh, it's good or it's not good. Other aspect too is we were talking about those trigger-based event. So we want to get the data loaded as soon as it's ready. We are giving access to people to see when is the data loaded in the backend system. So for every source of data, you will see has it been loaded, yes, how long did it take, et cetera, et cetera. So that information is very useful, because if people can get it themselves, they don't need to contact DBA's dev or support team at all time, because they can get it in about 15 seconds by themselves. And same thing, I don't know if you were ever a site admin or a server admin, but you get access to a lot of dashboards that give you statistics and helps you understand what is happening on the server. What we're trying to do is make those available to almost everyone, just so they're able to track themselves what's going on the server, so they don't need to rely on other team or on the server admin to explain to them what's going wrong or what's going well. Usually they mostly care when it's going wrong, obviously. So this will tell you, oh, every single process that is running, has it been failing? Is it in queue? Is it currently running? Or is it completed? And like how many rows were loaded for extract and stuff like that. So we make sure that's basically data to the people. A couple other things that we're using it to. So we're also using it, obviously, for QA. So it can be easily done to share. So the promotion schedule of most of our system, obviously dev, QA, UAT, and prod. So now that everyone is using Tableau, now that everyone is trained in Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server, it's way easier to do QA on millions and millions of records directly on Tableau Server or Tableau Desktop instead of sending dozens of Excel spreadsheets or CSV to do so. So that's an approach that we do, and what's really interesting is then we can find a way to join environments together, do a difference, do a regression, see what is actually happening in my UAT versus my prod, or dev versus UAT, et cetera, et cetera. And then people who requested model change, people who requested any change of anything in any system are able to see firsthand what is actually happening, and then give an approval. There's also this idea that what we can do easily is we can publish empty extract on the server. So I don't know if you guys have ever been running very, very large extract on your machine, but this can take all of your RAM and take hours and hours, and then you can't do anything with your computer. So the idea is we're publishing empty extract to the server, and then we're using our server to generate the extract itself. There's a couple very good links that explain how to do that. It's very, very easy. I'll add them in the PowerPoint for you as well. Another thing too, very quickly, every single system on Tableau Server, you can change the connection and cross environment directly, so you don't need to download a copy, change it manually, and then republish it. So if you're using Oracle, it's called TNS name. On everything else, you can create an aliases, and basically it allows you to change what is the connection to the database directly on Tableau Server without having to do anything. So it's really, really nice to be able to change environment in less than 3 seconds on Tableau Server, basically. Okay, so let's go into something maybe a little bit more interesting for you. So let's cover quickly reporting and some tools. Let me check. Okay. So a lot of our reporting is still done in PDF. So I'll show you a couple quick examples. So I think one of our first approach for reporting is know your audience. Are you sending this to management? Are you sending this to regulators? Are you sending this to analysts? And then based on that, do you want to make it more visual or less visual? Or do you want to make it more table-based? How much do they really care about colors? And that's the thing I was discussing with some of our friends from the Federal Reserve before. We learned recently that the Federal Reserve actually is really interested, and other regulators too, of getting dashboards that are very, very, very visual. They also care of getting the raw numbers, but now they want to see a little bit more of this executive summary, basically that you're getting. So they want to get nice pie chart, nice bar chart, et cetera, trend lines, and not only tables and things with a lot of colors, which is something that we did not expect just a few years ago. So there seems like there's a change of mindset across the whole landscape as well. So that's an example of like some of very simple reports that we have. I can show you a couple others. Really quickly. So the idea too is to use different kind of spacing to create hierarchies in our reports. So for example, you'll understand here that like FX India, FX Seoul is rolling up, is rolling under FX Asia, and FX Asia is rolling under Asia FX Consolidated. So really quick visual way to understand your hierarchies. And also just reports that basically are a little bit more have a little bit more of a mix of bar charts and numbers. What we did as well, basically, in terms of incentive on reporting and tools, going back to the training, is we made sure that we would run a contest for someone in the trading floor risk management to put together the best viz or the best tool that they can in a short amount of period, in a couple of months or a couple of weeks, and the winner would go to the conference. So there was a lot of interest there, so a lot of people participated, and you saw way more people publish their work too. So that's a great way to get some interest in using Tableau, basically, as well. One thing that you can see as well on the top left is there's a little menu here, menu icon that looks a little bit like what you have on application. The idea is you want your reports, even if you're generating PDF, to be able to have a little bit more dynamic. So you want to be able to change the date, run them back date, obviously, maybe change the currency because we have people in Asia, we have people in London, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't want all of those filters and those parameters to show up because they usually show up pretty poorly in a PDF format. So what we do is, well, it was a lot more interesting before we saw Dev on stage and the fact that they're adding that now. So they kind of stole our thunder. But what we do for this is basically we create, so let me just show you full screen. We have this little menu that we can open and close and basically show up all the parameters and the filters. So you can do it at the bottom, at the top, on the left, or the right, anything like that. But this is something that we try to use as much as possible so it doesn't become too cumbersome. And as long as people realize that there's a button and they can click, because usually new users don't know and they don't click and they're like, how can I change stuff? So we just let them know, we train them about that. They usually enjoy using this little button and it makes it a little bit more like we're actually in the mobile days, basically. So let me go over this quick tool and just really show you like a simple dynamic tool that we're using for analysis. So there's obviously a lot of information there. It's not necessarily very clear because this is not something that you use necessarily for presentation. This is something that we're going to use on a daily basis, so we know what each column are. But we're going to focus basically on the 3 columns here, the one that have risk 1, risk 2, and risk change. So what we're trying to do here is to have an idea of how much money we're going to make or lose if interest rate in the market are moving by 1 beeps down. 1 beeps is basically 100%, so it's 0.01%. So let's say 10 years interest rate right now in the US are 3.20%. If they were to move from 3.20% to 3.19%, how much money would we make or how much money would we lose? And what is driving that? So that's like very, very simple what-if scenario, if you want, in a way. So, sorry about the mic. So here that we have at the very top more of an approach at the top of the house level. How much money am I making if all the interest rate goes down by 1 basis point? So I would be basically making $1.6 million today. The day before I was making 1.5 million, and then this is the daily change of 60K. I think one thing that is really important when you do risk or just any reporting or analysis is you always want to show the change. Basically, just taking a snapshot as of today doesn't tell you much. Saying a day over day change, a week over week, month over month, and a trend gives you so much more information about what is really happening behind the scene. And this is usually what is going to be driving your analysis and your investigation. So we can see those are different curves, basically. And then on the right, we basically see all the different position or all the different trades that we did with our counterparties, with other banks, with corporation, with government, and how much they're driving each one of them, basically. So we got like 67,000 here, and then we're basically aggregating them by type of assets. So we see bonds, we see interest rate derivative, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but just to show you what it looks like. Then the idea is you can do more of a top-down approach where I'm going to look from each different country's interest rate curve. If I click on one, then what is my exposure in this type of asset, and what is my exposure in terms of individual trades? So if I unclick here, you're going to see we had something like 67K position, and then we moved down to basically only 20K position in the Canadian interest rate world. You also saw something appear, which basically, depending on the selection that you do, you're going to get different sheet that's going to go into your viz, because you don't look at risk the same way for each type of asset, basically. So you probably want to create different viz for different type of asset, and have Tableau recognize which asset class you're clicking on. So here, all we're seeing is like a bar chart of the exposure of different term of interest rate curve, for example, because interest rate curve can go from 1 day to 30 years in terms of exposure, basically, or more than 30 years. And then the idea here is you can keep drilling down. You can, for example, click on any of the asset class, and it's going to narrow down the exposure in the term structure, and narrow it down just to show which deals are actually bonds deal, which deals are interest rate derivative deals, which deals are future. So it's like very simple stuff. Everyone's been using this as well. The idea too is we want to make everything as flexible as possible because not everyone has Tableau Desktop. We're trying to get Tableau Desktop to as much people, but when we're sharing this on Tableau Server to our business partner, so people outside of TFRM, they might not have Tableau Desktop, so they might not be able to play with the raw data themselves. So we want to make the tool as flexible as Tableau Desktop is. So we're going to get a bunch of parameters at the top, so you're going to be able to change the level of aggregation of each of the sheet, basically. So let's say I want to see something a little bit more granular than the instrument class. So see a little bit more what are my actual asset type or instrument that are flowing in. Can go here. Then I have a list of multiple dimension. I can change it to instrument type. And then you'll see I'll get a little bit more granular information here and more different type of instruments. So you can change this all the way. Then the vis readjusts itself, basically. You can change that across the board because we were looking at this scenario of what happened if the interest rate risk go down by 0.01%. What if we wanted to see the notional? What if we wanted to see a different type of measure or a different type of what-if scenario? We can change all of that and see different measure here. So I can select, for example, gamma, and then all of my number will change. I'm not going to go too much into gamma. It's a different type of sensitivities. It's a second-order derivative of what we were looking at, basically. So all the numbers change, and then I'm able to continue doing my analysis, basically. So this gives you the full flexibility. And then we were doing a top-down approach, but if someone wants to look at it from a bottom-up approach, then what we can do as well is you can actually look at it from individual deals on the right. Sort them by which one has my biggest exposure, sort them by which one has my lowest exposure, the biggest day over day change, and then I can easily see if I scroll at the top, this was my biggest day over day change, basically, and this has exposure today. It did not have exposure yesterday, so it's probably a new trades that I just put on. So I can easily use this as what we call a trade plotter, basically to track activity as well. There are other tools for this, but if you're able to get all the information in one place, it's even better. And obviously, you can do individual search of deal too, so you can type in and find an individual transaction. And then if you hover over it, you're going to get more information. We're trying to leverage tooltip as much as possible. We're using our older version of Tableau 10.2, so we don't have the full flexibility of having viz within tooltips and do cooler stuff with this, but this will change soon, hopefully. Let's go very quickly into another even simpler tool right here. So are we doing on time? OK, perfect. So we're looking here at VAR, which is basically a value at risk. So it's normally the theoretical maximum amount that you should lose, the 99th percentile maximum amount of money that you should lose over 100 days of trading, basically. And what we've been seeing is like the calculation behind it can be fairly complex and hard to understand what is driving the numbers, especially when we have hundreds of thousands or millions of deals flowing into this with so many different exposure to different asset type and asset classes and risk factors. So it's so much convoluted information goes into one number. So how can we understand what is going on there? This is not something that we own, but very easily in a few minutes, we're able to start building a dashboard that does correlation. So correlation doesn't imply causality, but it still gives you an insight of like what is driving my value at risk, my VAR, for the old bank. And the reason why it's important is because value at risk basically incurs a capital charge. So the higher your value at risk is, the more capital you get to put away, so the less money you have to actually do your daily banking activities. So that's definitely a number that everyone cares about. So really quickly, we put together this correlation matrix of like different desks that we have, different trading desks, and see who is the most correlated with the enterprise, and that might give us an idea of who's driving it, and then we can start drilling down within this. So right here, we're saying that the enterprise, the bank as a whole, is very correlated with this CMG. I can decide to change my time horizon a little bit and regenerate new correlation right away. And this is extremely fast to compute as well. I can decide to add more portfolio to it, so I can basically expand my matrix and my time series at the bottom just by selecting something. Let's look at all the swaps that we have, and let's see how much swaps are correlated with the enterprise. There are barely any correlation there. So really easily, you're able to get some insights that way. So these are like two very, very simple tools that we use. The idea behind all of this is basically we were integrating Tableau for more efficiency to basically have better collaboration across teams, because we're able to turn around stuff faster and then share it with multiple different departments in the bank and be way more effective in what we're doing. And this is what we basically have been achieving recently and what we want to keep doing moving forward. So I'm going to finish this a little bit early, so this way there's more time for questions if you want. So thank you very much. So don't forget to do the survey as well. Yes?
How soon after the end of the trading day,
It really depends on which type of asset and in which, for example, where are we booking the trade. In some cases, it could take a few minutes. In some cases, it could take multiple hours too. And it also depends on the location of where that was booked. So it really, really depends on the area of things. If you want to wait, if you need to wait for everything to be put together for one number, then obviously that's going to take multiple hours. But if you want to focus on one thing in particular, well, you can do it technically a few seconds after this was booked as well. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, sure. So across the whole bank, because we're like close to 100K people, I have no idea how many Tableau developers. I know a few years ago, we were supposed to have the most desktop license in Canada, so I'm guessing we probably have a few thousand. What it is today, I do not know. Within TFRM, so the Trading Flow Risk Management, the team that I was mentioning, to which I worked on, we're about 150 people. I would say that probably close to half of the people have Tableau Desktop license and different level of skills, basically. So we're trying to make this as widely used as possible. Are you a Tableau developer because you have Tableau Desktop license? That's a question that I'll leave to you to answer. But that basically gives you an idea that a lot of people are able to play around with it. And okay, yeah, the menu. So the menu thing, I'm not going to go too much in depth just because it's a little bit complicated. But the idea here, just to give you, if you go into layout, you're going to see that my first layout here starts at a position of minus 135. So basically, the top left points of my object is outside of my window. So then what I have here is I have something on the top, which is a sheet that basically expand and collapse based on an action. So it basically expand and collapse. So now it collapsed. So when it collapsed, this object moved down. And now it basically, it changed again, so the object moves up. So that's just the idea of how this works. So this is it's simple in theory, just putting in and making it work. That's a little bit more complicated. But that's the idea, and you can do the same thing left, right as well. Yes?
The idea of having common data sources on the server sounds good, but do the developers only have access to that, or can they access a lot of different data sources, which I would expect that they would like to do?
Yes, so, well, they already have access to an enormous amount of data, so usually that would probably cover like 90% of their needs. But if they need to access something, for example, an Excel spreadsheet that they put together or some information that they were looking at Bloomberg or anything like that, they can also do it, and they can also upload basically their data as a Tableau Server Data source too, so other people can start sharing it. So it's not only the support team of Tableau who basically have access to the backend system that can do this. Everyone is able to contribute. But if they need to actually to access like an Hadoop cluster or Hadoop or access an Oracle database, they probably do not have access there in the first place. So they would need to request to someone who do have access and put the query together generally. Okay. Yes. You mean like do we have any issue with the DBAs or the people in the backend, or just?
With your, like any third-party data providers.
Oh, we don't have a lot of third-party providers basically for what we're using, so we're not running too much into that problem. Eventually, when we do integrate more of that, that's definitely going to be an issue. But most of the data that we use are market data or sensitivity data that we're actually either we're generating them ourselves or we're buying the actual ownership of it. So then after that, we can do whatever we want with it, basically. But that's also limitative because obviously, we can't just pull data from Bloomberg into an Excel spreadsheet and then put it on the server because that's against the agreement that we have. Yes?
Integration with like financial control and treasury and other functions, or is this strictly maintained?
So we're definitely working, for example, because this group, TFRM, is covering GT as well, Group Treasury. We definitely have integration with them. We're working with other group too that are like, for example, everything that's operational risk, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some integration, but not necessarily all the different risk management team that exists or all the audit team have access to our server and to our tools. It depends on an ongoing basis and on a need-based basis. If audit wants to see something that we put together, then we give them access, whether for a few weeks or for a full period of time. So it really depends on do they request it, and then after that, is it of any value for them too? And the idea is like, you probably have that for every single large firm. There's so many different servers in the banks. So a lot of different teams also have their own servers and are doing their own thing. So do they actually want to pay like 6 times the server license for 6 different servers? Maybe not. So it really depends on how much value added accessing our servers will provide. Yes?
My question is multi-fold actually. One, do you use data for reporting for dashboards? Second, how do you tackle the performance issues? And if you have, what steps have you taken to do that? Because I've seen that in you've done that and you encountered some issues with that. And the Tableau on the other presentation said, believe in Tableau, they can do much faster as well without using a custom queries in some scenarios. So what's your take on it?
So we're definitely using live queries for every system, like where their backend table obviously have index and they're not like billions of records, right? Like if it's a SQL-based table that with like 20 billion records, live queries usually are not super fast. So we want to extract them. So it's usually just on a case-by-case basis. It's like we're looking at something that's like slow performance, and then we're going to be working with our dev to understand why is that query so slow, whether if it's going to be automatically generated by Tableau or if it's a custom SQL that we wrote ourselves. And then we can get into a conversation where they provide feedback, and then we can modify that query as well. And then we run into an issue where basically the query is just too big because we haven't narrowed down the scope enough of what we're trying to do. So then it's going back to the users, the person who's developing the report, and try to figure out what is he actually trying to do, and is there a more efficient way to translate his needs into actual data query, basically. So I'm not sure if I answered all of your question. I think I might be missing a part of it.
Any specific performance issue that you've had when you use custom queries?
Well, we have like multiple specific performance issue. For example, we have a lot of issue where some of our backend system would not allow us to create temp tables, so different custom SQL would basically very often crash depending on what it was. Things where it would not assign the right amount of core, so we needed to like specify directly in the queries the amount of core for that query. So basically that way we would optimize the performance a little bit more, and maybe we would assign a little bit more core to a query that we know was very important, and very less core to another query that was just like run once every month, for example. But we're probably running about, like, usually when we have problems with custom SQL, and it's not data that we need to get intraday, we're usually trying to take the solution to generating and scheduling an extract, basically, because this solves most of our issue. Obviously, if you're running on a system that you need new data every 2 minutes, well, it doesn't work so well, but even that, we schedule extracts on the 15-minute basis because the extract generation takes like 10 seconds to generate, and we've seen that this was even better performance than just doing a custom SQL in some cases. And our custom SQL are really usually narrowed down by a lot of parameters that makes it that it's going to get exactly what you want, basically. So, oh, sorry.
Tableau
I believe it's now 12 hours, or until it runs out of RAM, or not runs out, but like it's about 80 or 85% RAM. So that really goes back to, like, because the server automatically drops its cache once in a while, you can set it up to be done every 2 hours, 4 hours, or by the maximum default, which I think is 12 hours. And then it depends on like what your actual hardware that you have on Tableau Server. So the more hardware that you have, the more RAM that you have, the longer the cache is going to stay. But then you don't necessarily want something to be cached for 12 hours either, because there's a good chance that there's going to be a lot of new data coming in every few hours too. So like the problem is like, okay, it's cache, but it's not the most recent. So then the users need to click refresh, and then the cache actually slow them down more than anything else. So you need to find like kind of a balance there as well. So it really depends on what type of data you're using and what you're trying to achieve. Yes, we're definitely not doing this across the board, just because then you have all of your cores just generating PDF nonstop, and you're basically using all of your resource to generate PDF, and no one can actually load a viz anymore. So we're targeting this to like very, very specific items. Yes. Usually it's permissioning. So for example, sometimes it could be just we're changing to another environment that have the same data that's a replication where the permissioning is different. Other than that, it's working with DBAs to basically get the right permissioning to that user. Or usually also custom SQL generates 10 tables generally. If you're using Tableau joins, what I mean by that is just like dragging your tables and creating your own joins. There's a lot less 10 tables that are being generated, so you don't run into that issue nearly as much. So we probably refresh about 70 extracts a day. I would say like the average extracts probably have like 25 million records. So we're talking about a few hundreds of millions of records that we're incrementally adding every day, times mostly around 300 columns. So maybe that gives you an idea. We probably store about close to 1 terabyte of data on our Tableau server. Obviously, this is after it's been, like if it was in a CSV format, it would be like 10 terabytes after compression.
And these extracts doesn't have redundant data, right? Separate extracts.
That's a good point. Some of them do, just because in some cases we want to pre-aggregate it, or in some cases we want to do an extract that's very focused on one business, but we might want to do an extract that's a little bit poor in terms of performance, but that would include all the business. So this is, for example, you're probably not going to want to build a report on top of it, but if you want to do an investigation and find an individual deal, but you don't know where it was actually traded, where does it come from, then you get the old universe. That's a little bit slower to play around, but it still will help you find your answer, instead of like going through every single extracts that have different set of data. So there's a little bit of redundance, but we're trying to limit it to be as little as possible. I'm sorry. Yes?
You mentioned wanting to use machine learning in the future.
Yes.
So is the plan to use like external service connections to Python scripts, for example?
So we're just starting to work with, like, none of us have experience in machine learning or AI. So we're starting to work with basically our internal team in ScotiaBank that is specialized in this, like a decision science team. And there will be the one providing basically the best solution. So there's definitely going to be an integration potentially with our Python or our MATLAB. But I think a big chunk of it is just going to be the data is going to be hosted in a Hadoop cluster, and this is where we're going to be querying, and it's going to do a kind of a loop feedback aspect. And then the idea there is, like, if you have like an enterprise data lake, then whatever algorithm is running on that data can be easily replicated onto another table or another data for another group. So they care about how can you scale whatever we're doing in terms of ML across different business, basically. And that's why they're trying to host it into one big lake. Oh, yes.
Hi, yeah. So thank you for the presentation, first of all. So one challenge I've seen kind of on the report is that the users are either one end of the spectrum where they're either really quantitative or technical. They'll say, oh, don't worry about it. I'll build something in Python. That's exactly what I need. I don't need this fancy dashboard. Where on the other hand, it's more old school, and they're just using the Tableau as an interface for a SQL database.
Yes.
So how do you kind of find, what's the right balance?
I think the aspect is, like, we want to let people who can put together a very nice Python script and then use that as a source of data do it. The one thing we need to manage eventually is, like, we don't want to end up with having 1,200 or like 6,000 data source on the server because the ease of access, like finding the right data, becomes now so complicated. Your naming convention gets broken all the time, et cetera. So it's basically, we allow everyone to do it. Right now, we don't have that much people being extremely technical, coding their own stuff and putting it on the server. So it's not an issue. But eventually, if it does become, then we're going to have to set up multiple rules of like which one can go in and which one cannot, and can we actually put stuff together so it doesn't grow to become too big. But we definitely don't want to, like the big idea there is flexibility and trying to find a way to say yes in a good practice. Like we don't want to say no to people and limit them. One of the big idea of using Tableau is to go around all the limitation that we had before. So, yes.
How has this been accepted by senior management? And is there any anecdote or other kind of like takeaways about how this has helped us?
They're definitely very happy because they're seeing all the, well, they first believe into the proof of concept. This was fitting exactly their vision of where we want to move as a department. So they're the one who signed off on it. Obviously, they're the one that are approving the bill too, so they're okay with that. And a lot of them are finding this fairly cool as well to play around. It's nice to be able to have your senior vice president do his own analysis with correlation of VAR himself and basically feeling like he can do stuff himself, which he might not have felt in the past because he couldn't start coding in MATLAB and do that. So I think generally it's very, 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 very well accepted. And that's also why they're accepting to like do incentive and contests where we're spending money to basically send people to the conference as well. Yes?
So we're looking to do more of what you've done in having all the data sources that generally people use out on Tableau Server, as opposed to just having tons of sources everywhere.
Yeah.
So you mentioned naming convention. Is there other things that you would suggest as just best practice to make that be a success?
Definitely tags, like description, stuff like that. I know we went through an exercise of like having very, very like clear tags and stuff like that. And I think when we migrated from dev to prod, for some reason, we lost all of them. So like dozens of hours of work. But you really, I think it's like you try. The problem is like if it grows too much and then you realize that whatever you put together was not good enough and you need to redo it, then this is where you lose time. So you really need to try to plan ahead how big will your growth be and what do I need to do to handle this. And just like how do you separate your logic? Like a lot of our logic, for example, was to separate by business because most like trading floors usually are a little bit working in silos. The risk management of trading floor will also be usually working in silos. What if you want to change that approach? Then you probably want to have a naming convention or an approach that's totally different. Maybe you want to now do it on location. You want to centralize every single desk that is in New York, centralize every single desk that is in Toronto. So it's basically try to see where you want to go in the next couple of years and then plan around that, if I may say. Yes?
You know, from a capital market perspective, they have a lot of different desks. So when it comes to data sources, normally they use the same data with different types. You create multiple data sources in this desk, and combine it as one universe. And within the parameters and filters, you just say you only have access to this desk, that desk, and whatnot.
That has been an eternal debate for us. Ever since I joined the bank, it's always the approach of just from the data model and the data structure in the back end, do you want to like separate every single view by type of asset or type of business? Or do you want to try to standardize everything into one that will be poorly optimized but will allow you to look at everything from a top of the house perspective? And both approaches are good, and both approaches have also weakness. I think what we're trying right now is basically do both. So we can use one when we're trying to do a limit that's across the whole bank and every single type of asset, or analysis across the whole thing, and then do basically a smaller subset that are structured in a way that makes sense for the equity business, but would make no sense for everything that interest rate related, and then use that to do more in-depth analysis. Because the problem too is if you try to standardize everything too much, like there are certain aspects for certain asset class or certain business that won't really make much sense. And you don't want to have everyone to have to learn all of these weird logic of all the data is pivoted, what is the dozens of filter that you need to do to not have duplication and stuff like that. It needs to, like you don't want people to become data scientists. You want people to be first like financial market expert, risk manager expert. So it needs to connect to the data, drag something, and that numbers make sense right away. If you have to do manipulation for like 10 minutes, we kind of failed on that aspect. So we're trying to do both, just it depends on which purpose you're trying to achieve.
And then when you have so much data extract or terabytes of data, would you put that on the schedule then for both sides, or?
No, we still want to do everything trigger-based, once again, just because the earlier it runs, the better, especially if it runs like overnight, then like all your backgrounders on Tableau Server, they're using so much resource to run all of these extracts. Obviously, even if you're separating them into different nodes, which you should definitely do, have all your backgrounders in the second or third, fourth nodes, basically, so your main nodes for query doesn't run out of RAM. Even if you're doing that, like you're usually seeing a performance decrease when you have lots of extracts running at the same time that people are doing their query. So you definitely still want to have as much stuff that is trigger-based because you want to have it run as soon as possible, basically. At least that's my opinion. Any other question? Good question. I didn't cover this. Well, once again, we mentioned that day over day change or week over week change is so important. That's your risk the day before. So you're seeing right away visually in a bar chart what is your change in risk, and you can know that like, oh, bonds risk changed quite a lot. So I can click and like drill down into the individual position that is bond. So yeah, so that's the idea. See, when you have a lot of data, then it starts getting a little bit slower. So. All right, if there's no other question, thank you very much.